So today we're going to look at 8A, reducing balance loans. Okay? So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the same pieces from previous chapters, so from chapter 7, in order to be able to find the balance when you are making payments. So first thing we want to do is just to remind you of the terms. If you have A sub 0, that is always the principal of the loan. Okay. All right. All right, so A sub 0 is the principal of the loan. A sub n simply means the balance after n compounding periods, which I'm going to abbreviate just as periods. Okay. I is simply the decimal interest rate. But remember that if you compound for more than one period per year, you have to take your I divided by your K. So for example, quarterly, weekly, etc. And this time we'll also be introducing capital R, which is simply the repayment amount per period. Be careful about that per period, because they may give it to you yearly, but the payments are made quarterly. So you'd have to divide it by 4 to find out how much the actual payment is. They will not do that to you in the homework, but it's something that a twist that they could throw in later when you're doing complex unfamiliar, right? And of course, in order to use these formulas, we have to remember our R value. Lowercase r is simply 1 plus I. Okay? Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a formula for this. And this formula is given on your sheet as the recurrence relation for reducing balance loans. So it is on your formula sheet. And it's simply A to the n plus 1 is equal to R times A sub n, which is exactly what we've been doing in the past to find the balances. But this time, since we're making repayments, we will be subtracting our capital R, which stands for the payment amount per period. So you're still going to be charging, so what this is saying is charging interest on the previous balance and subtracting out your payment amount. In English, yes? Okay? So let's write out some steps for doing this. Now, to use this formula, you don't want to have to do all the math by hand. Instead, you're just going to enter it into your calculator. But remember that all loans actually start with the principal amount. So when you're doing this, always list your principal amount first. And then you'll hit equals on the calculator. So you need that. So let's make a list of steps for these. The first step is to simply write the values for A sub 0, I, and R. Capital R, which is your repayment. You'll also need to calculate lowercase r, which just means add your whatever value you get for I, add 1 to it. Okay? And then you can write your formula from there. Simply substituting those values. And that gives you your recurrence relation for that particular information. Then what we'll have to do is we want to start finding some values for those. And so what we'll do is we'll use the calculator to find the value for the specified period. So they're going to tell you how many periods they want you to find it for. For example, they may say a year, and if it's 1 year and you're compounding monthly, that means I'd have to do it 12 times, right? So they'll give you the number of compounding periods. To do that, remember the steps for your calculator. First, you'll type in your principal amount and then hit enter. If you don't hit equals, it won't set it into your calculator's memory and this won't work. Then, second thing is you're going to type in the formula, the actual mathematics. And since the principal amount is your first a to the nth, then you're just going to type in times your r minus your capital R. And then again, to set it and to do it, you need to hit your equals. That's going to give you your first value. Then you're simply going to have to press equals to get the second value, the third value, the fourth value, etc. Once you've entered it in, if you entered it in correctly, then you never have to do any more math with it. You just have to hit enter. What you do need to make sure that you're doing, though, is you need to write down those values as you go so you know which one you're on. Your calculator screen is not big enough for you to be able to see all the ones that you've done previously. So and it's really easy to lose count, right? So write them down as you go so that you'll know those values. Okay? Now, we'll look at an example of this in a minute, but what I want to do is I want to put in the second part of this. Okay. Because what this formula does is this formula finds the amount of a loan at a certain point, right? After a certain number of periods. You will also be asked to find the interest paid on a loan. Okay? Now, if this is the case, you're going to use a different formula. And I'm going to write it out for you in words first so that you can see that it makes perfect sense. And then I'll write it out as a formula and you can relate those pieces together. You're going to use this formula now and then you're going to use it for the next section so you'll get a chance to practice with it, which is important because it is not on your formula sheet. So you need to pay attention to what I'm about to say so that you'll know how to find this. Okay? Anytime you see the letter capital I, that simply means the interest charged or earned, but we're doing a loan, so they're going to be charging it, right? After so many periods. Right? So, we need a couple of things. The reduction in principal, because your whole point is to pay off the loan, right? To pay back the principal that you borrowed. The reduction in principal after n periods can be found by simply taking a sub 0 minus a sub n. Which, if you remember, means a sub 0 is always the principal, and that's minus the balance at a given point in time. So principal minus the balance. So, for example, if they wanted after 8 months, then you would need to find the balance at 8 months and then subtract that from the principal. And that's called the reduction in principal. Which is the whole point of paying off the loan or paying the loan, is you want to reduce that principal. The second part you need to know is the total repayments made after n periods. Okay? Now to find that, that's simply n times your capital R, where n is the number of payments that you've made, or the number of periods, so it equates to the number of payments, and R is the payment amount, right? So, the total repayments, you want all of the repayments you've made, so simply multiply the number of payments you've made times the amount, and that'll give you the payment amount. Now, the interest is the amount that's left over after you subtract the balance from how much you've paid. So there's always going to be a difference between those two. And so we can find the total amount of interest as simply the total repayments minus the reduction in principal. So the total amount you paid minus the balance you still owe is what that's saying. And we're going to write it as a formula using the pieces that we've already become familiar with. I'm just going to put it here at the bottom. N times R minus our principal minus our balance, so A sub 0 minus A sub n is how you would write that as a formula. So in other words, the repayments made minus the balance reduction. And you can do that as two pieces and simply subtract them if you want, but you're going to see this formula, this form of this given quite a lot, and so you need to be used to doing the whole thing at one time as well. I'm always going to take it as two pieces when we do any examples. All right? So, two pieces. We want to know the balance of the loan after a given point in time, and then we want to be able to find the interest that was paid up to that given time. So let's look at an example. So, say that Henry is going to borrow, and I'm not going to write down the whole thing, I'm going to abbreviate a little bit, $20,000 at 8.4% compounded quarterly. And he'll make payments of $1,500, and he's going to do that quarterly. Which is nice because your compounding period and your payments are matching. That's a good thing, all right? Keep that in mind as you think about what they're going to do to you to torture you with more complicated questions on this topic, right? So he's going to borrow $20,000. So what we need to do is start listing the pieces that we need to know. First of all, we have to know the principal no matter what. So the principal of the loan is $20,000. So that's our starting point. We also need to know our interest amount. And in this case, it's 8.4%, but it's being compounded quarterly. So we need to change 8.4 to a decimal, so 0.084, if we move the decimal over two places. But since it's being compounded quarterly, we will also have to divide it by 4 to find the interest rate per compounding period, right? We've done that tons of times. And when you do that division, you get 0.021. So that's our I, the interest rate we're going to be using as a decimal. We also need to list our repayment amount, and that is $1,500, and he's also paying it quarterly. Be sure to check that those two match. If not, you're going to have to make them match. And then finally, in order to be able to use our formula, we need our R value, our lowercase r, which is simply 1 plus your I, which simply puts a 1 in front of your I value. Okay? Now, our first question is going to just ask, what is the balance after 1 year? So, this loan is being compounded quarterly. So there are 4 quarters in a year. So 1 year equals 4 quarters. Therefore, we're going to have to find this up until A sub 4. Okay? So let's just put the recurrence relation in our formula and get a formula for it so we can enter it in our calculator. Remember, you always start off with the principal, so the principal amount is $20,000. Therefore, the next value can be found by taking your R times your A sub n and then subtracting away the repayment amount. Now, if you want to make this look more like what you're going to put in your calculator, you could rearrange that formula because remember, multiplication can be done in any order. So you could always put it as A sub n times your R minus your capital R. So if you want to rearrange it to make it look more like what you're going to enter in your calculator, you feel free. Now what we need to do is we need to start putting those things in our calculator. So the first thing we're going to put in is we're going to put in our 20,000, and then we're going to hit our equal symbol. Then, second step is to then put in times our R, which is 1.021, minus, excuse me, my payment amount, which is $1,500. And then we'll hit equals. And that will give us the balance after one compounding period. So let's just make a list of those amounts. First, we have $20,000 to begin with. When we calculate the first one, all right, so calculating that, you get for A1, 18,920. So now let's calculate our second value. And remember that every other value, every subsequent values can be simply found by pushing the equal symbol. Okay, so that's not the correct value. Sorry about that. So, pardon? All you have to do is, once you enter it, you can just hit equals from that point forward. Okay, hold on just one moment. Okay, so pushing those in, the last value we get for A4, which is our fourth quarter, so that's 1 year, and it goes to 0.4, which we will round to just 0.0, right? Because we're doing money, so we always round to 2 decimal places. So our sentence then, the answer to this question is, after 1 year, Henry, which I didn't write that earlier, but that's the person who's getting loan, Henry will have a balance of $15,542. Okay? So, learn those keystrokes, practice those keystrokes. You will be sad if you don't. The second part of this question, part B, asks you, how much interest did he pay in that first year? So, if we're looking for how much interest he paid, remember that interest is simply the payment amount. So that's your N times your payment amount. So the number of payments you made times the amount of the payment minus the balance of the loan, and the balance is found by taking A sub n minus, A sub 0 minus A sub n. In this particular instance, we went through 4 compounding periods. So that's the number of periods was 4 times $1,500 per payment. Our original principal was $20,000. And the amount that we had at the end, the balance of the loan at the end of those 4 periods was $15,542, the number we just calculated. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Number of payments times the payment amount minus the principal minus the balance. We'll tell you how much interest was left. So taking 4 times 1,500, that's 6,000. Taking 20,000 minus 15,542 is 4,458. Then we just have to complete the subtraction. Gives us $1,542. And again, you would need to write this as a sentence. So in the first year, Henry paid $1,542 in interest. So, for homework for this section, it's section 8A. You're going to do 1, A, C, and E, and numbers 2 and 3, all of them.